Have you ever heard of that one single moment that changed everything? A moment so powerful it shifted the entire course of a war? For Robert E. Lee, the legendary commander of the Confederate Army, that moment arrived in the dark, smoky woods of Virginia in May 1864. It wasn't a grand battle or a heroic charge, but a simple choice made at a dusty crossroads. And when he understood it, Lee knew the war he had been fighting and winning was over. To really get what happened, we need to rewind a bit. For 3 long years, the American Civil War had fallen into a predictable, almost grimly theatrical pattern. The massive Union Army of the Potomac would march south into Virginia, full of confidence. Robert E. Lee and his Army of Northern Virginia, though almost always outnumbered, would brilliantly outmaneuver them. There'd be a huge, bloody battle. Think Second Bull Run, Fredericksburg, or Chancellorsville. The Union would suffer a shocking defeat, and its commander, whether it was Pope, Burnside, or Hooker, would lose his nerve. They'd pack up and retreat back to the safety of Washington, D.C., giving Lee's battered army precious time to rest, refit, and prepare for the next round. It was a cycle of advance, defeat, and retreat that had left the Union demoralized and the Confederacy defiantly holding on. Lee had become a master at exploiting this pattern. He knew his opponent's psychology. He knew that after one hard punch, they would always turn back. But in 1864, a new opponent entered the ring. His name was Ulysses S. Grant. Grant was different. He wasn't a flashy strategist from a prestigious military family. He was a plain, quiet man from Ohio who had a simple, brutal philosophy of war. Find the enemy, hit him as hard as you can, and keep moving forward. After his stunning victories out west at Vicksburg and Chattanooga, President Lincoln brought him east and gave him command of all Union armies, making him a lieutenant general, a rank not held since George Washington. His primary mission? Destroy Robert E. Lee's army, not capture cities, not win political points, but annihilate the main Confederate force. In early May 1864, Grant's massive army, over 100,000 strong, crossed the Rapidan River and plunged into a dense, tangled forest known as the Wilderness. It was the worst possible place to fight a battle. The woods were so thick you could barely see 50 feet in front of you. Artillery was useless, command and control were nearly impossible, and the fighting quickly devolved into a series of vicious, close-quarters firefights. For 2 days, May 5th and 6th, the armies tore each other apart in this green hell. Men fought blindly in the thick undergrowth, firing at muzzle flashes. The dry woods caught fire, and the smoke, mixed with the roar of musketry, created a scene of pure chaos. Horrifically, many of the wounded who couldn't crawl to safety were burned alive. By the end of the second day, the battle was essentially a brutal, bloody draw. The Union Army had suffered over 17,000 casualties, a staggering number. By the old rules, by the pattern Lee had come to rely on, this was the moment of truth. Another Union general, battered and bloodied, would declare the campaign a failure, lick his wounds, and head north to the safety of Washington. Lee's men, exhausted but victorious in spirit, expected exactly that. Some of his officers were even celebrating. They had held their ground against a much larger force. They had bloodied Grant's nose just like they had all the others. Surely the Yankees would now retreat. As night fell on May 7th, the Union Army began to move. The weary soldiers, covered in dirt and gunpowder, picked up their rifles and fell into marching columns. They came to a critical intersection in the woods. One road, the Orange Turnpike, led north, back toward the river and safety. It was the road of retreat, the road they had taken so many times before. The other road, the Brock Road, led south, deeper into Virginia, deeper toward the Confederate capital of Richmond, deeper toward Lee's army. For the soldiers in the ranks, the moment was thick with tension. Which way would they be ordered to turn? Would it be another failure? Another long, demoralizing march backward? Then, a figure on horseback appeared through the gloom. It was General Grant, his face set and determined. He rode to the intersection and, without hesitation, pointed his army down the Brock Road, to the south. What happened next was one of the most remarkable moments of the entire war. According to Horace Porter, one of Grant's aides who witnessed the scene, a wave of realization swept through the exhausted troops. They weren't retreating. They were advancing. For the first time, after a major battle with Lee, they were pushing forward. And the soldiers erupted. They began to cheer. Not a formal, disciplined cheer, but a wild, spontaneous roar of relief and renewed purpose. They threw their hats in the air. They crowded around Grant's horse, reaching out to touch him, shouting his name. They knew, in that instant, that the old way of fighting and losing was over. This general was different. This time, they were in it to the end. Meanwhile, in the Confederate camp, Robert E. Lee was having a very different conversation. While some of his subordinates were confident, even jubilant, believing they had sent another Union commander packing, Lee was not so sure. He understood Grant's reputation from the war in the West. He knew Grant was relentless. One of his generals, Henry Heth, later wrote about that night in his memoirs. Lee gathered his officers and gave them a stark warning. He told them they could not afford to be overconfident. He knew Grant was not like the others. Lee's assessment was chillingly direct. He reportedly told them, "Gentlemen, we have not driven the enemy. He has retreated as a matter of strategy. We must stop him before he gets to Spotsylvania. This is not like the other commanders. He will not go back." Just think about that. Robert E. Lee, the master of the battlefield, looked at the situation and saw something entirely new. He saw that the psychological weapon he had wielded so effectively, the fear of defeat that caused his opponents to retreat, was useless against this man. Grant had taken Lee's best punch in the wilderness, suffered horrific casualties, and instead of backing down, he was now trying to get around Lee's flank and continue his drive south. Lee's grim realization at that crossroads marked the true turning point of the Civil War in Virginia. It signaled the end of the war of maneuver and the beginning of a brutal war of attrition. Grant's strategy was now clear. He would use the North's overwhelming advantage in men and materials to grind Lee's army into dust. He would attack and attack and attack again. He would not give Lee's army a moment to rest or recover. From the wilderness, the armies would clash again and again at places with names that are now synonymous with slaughter: Spotsylvania Courthouse, Cold Harbor, and finally, the long, grinding siege of Petersburg. The fighting would be relentless for the next 11 months. Grant famously wrote to Washington, "I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer." He was a man of his word. He knew he could replace his losses, while Lee could not. Every Confederate soldier lost was a blow the South could not absorb. So, that simple turn at a fork in the road was more than just a tactical decision. It was a declaration. It was Grant telling Lee and the world that the rules had changed. There would be no more retreats. There would be no more time for the Confederacy to catch its breath. There was only the path forward, a path that led through blood and fire, but one that Grant was determined to walk until the very end at Appomattox Courthouse. It was the moment Robert E. Lee knew he was facing an opponent who would never, ever turn back. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this piece of history as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the moments that shaped our world. Let me know in the comments what other historical turning points you'd like to explore. See you next time.